this is part 2 of the build, of the actual build, and if you'll notice I've got a bright yellow shirt laying here. Just a little bit of a tip, and most of you probably know, is good thing is to put a towel down when you're building, specifically diffs or anything small. A towel works better than a shirt. I didn't have a towel that my wife would let me use, but a bright one works well, like a yellow, a green, a white, orange, anything like that. I don't go with black typically, and the reason for the towel is if you drop a part, it just falls right on the towel. Doesn't really bounce, especially a good thick towel, it'll just stay there. On this hard surface, you drop a diff ball, it's going on the floor. Good luck finding that. So just a little tip there. But here we've got the diff bag, and we're going to go ahead and open this up, and we'll be back and continue on, so stay tuned. Okay, the first part of the diff, we're going to build the center of the, this is actually like the thrust washer here. Go ahead and put your small washer on first. We'll go ahead and zoom in a little bit here. Hopefully you can see that. Probably not too well. But this particular diff here, and that's how most of them are with the thrust bearing, actually takes the black grease, and we've got that right here. What I like to do is apply the grease actually to the washer, with the washer and the actual thrust screw on there. Get a good amount. I don't know if you can see that. There you go. And then you simply place the balls in there. Again, I just dropped one, so these are really, really small. A lot smaller than the like associated ones and whatnot. You can, if you get a little grease in your hand, you can actually, on your fingers, you can use those to pick up the balls. So we've got them all just kind of smeared in there. We'll go ahead and put the top washer on. And then we can line them all up once we get that top washer on. Okay, they're all in there. See if you can see that. There we go. That's the easiest way to do that. A lot of people try to put the balls in there first and then the grease. It's really tough that way. So we're going to go ahead and we're actually going to put a little bit more grease on there. I'm just using the tip of my X-Acto here. Because you really, you can't get too much in here. And you'll, if you're like me, you'll probably end up rebuilding this after every race, or not every race, every weekend. So some qualifiers and a main and some practice on them. There we go. Okay, that's it for that. Next thing we want to do, take one of the outdrive halves, this one here. We'll go ahead and slip that down in there. Got that in there. Now here are the diff rings. There actually is a wrong and a right side. There's a rounded edge on the inside here that goes towards the diff balls. So you can see that. And another thing you want to do, what I like to do, I don't think it actually necessarily says that in the instructions here, but go ahead and put some grease on the actual outdrive. Just get a little chunk of it there. And you don't want too much. I've actually wiped most of it off, but you want some. And then go ahead and we'll smear the actual ring with the grease as well. You can also put this in a plastic bag with the grease, and then that way you don't get your hands all yucky. But go ahead and put that on there. Now if I were doing a touring car, I would actually take the diff ring and I would sand it down with like 1500 grit, 1000 then 1500, and make it a mirror finish. But I'm not going to do that with this. It's an off-road. Go ahead and put the bearing on. Then we've got our gear, differential gear. Now the kit balls here, the diff balls, they're just cheap. I would go with a carbide or a ceramic. We've got ceramic in this case. And what I like to do here is before I put anything in, I'll get some grease and I'll smear some grease in each one of these holes. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm not going to film all that. And then when I get that all greased up, we'll just pop the balls. They literally just pop in there and we'll go on. So stay tuned. Okay, next we're going to take, there's this little plastic piece. You want to put the nut in there. We still got to get to the other side. We're just prepping for that actually, the other side of the diff. And this could be a little finicky. What you can do is take your Allen. That one's a little too big. Here's a smaller one. Take your Allen, put the nut on the end of that, and then push it in there. That makes it a lot easier. Hopefully you saw that. The thrust spring here, what you want to do with that is you want to compress that down first with a set of pliers to kind of break it in. So you just get your pliers, take your thrust, and compress it down a couple times. There we go. Okay, next we're going to take the other diff half, which has got an actual little nib on it. We're going to put some grease on there. They don't give you a whole lot of grease with this kit, which you really don't need a whole lot, but it'd be nice to have a little extra instead of having to go buy some. We're going to grease up the other diff ring. And as far as the greases go, I kind of like the Associated because it comes in a tube. This you've got to kind of dig out of this little container, which, you know, I'm not really complaining. It's just, it's hard to get it out, especially when they don't give you a whole lot. So we've got that pretty well greased up. Again, on this side you want the rounded edge to the balls. We'll go ahead and put our bearing on. Little bearing goes there. Go ahead and put our diff gear on. That goes over the bearing. Put the other half together. Then our spring goes in, which is right here. And then our little locking nut. And we'll go ahead and tighten that up. Go ahead and push that in there just so it gets seated down in there. Got to get our flathead out. We'll go ahead and tighten this up a little bit, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how to adjust it for the time being while it's out of the vehicle. So stay tuned. Okay, we've actually got the diff all put together. Make sure it's smooth. You want to also make sure it's tight, not really tight to the twisting action. You'll be able to adjust that later when it's in the vehicle, which is what you should do. But you want to make sure it's actually tight so it doesn't slip on the balls and the actual rings. So go ahead and put a couple screwdrivers in each half and give it a real good tug. Make sure it doesn't spin, and again, make sure it's smooth. Now we've got our diff halves here, or transmission halves I should say. This is the left hand side. Go ahead and make sure you're following the instructions. In this case, this outer ring, it's different than the other half, goes on into the right hand side, so facing on the left. Go ahead and put that in. Then we've got our other gear here, which I believe is our idler gear. Don't really remember all the terminology. I'm gonna go ahead and put a little bit of grease on there. I actually ended up getting some Associated. A lot easier to manage. You get a lot more in there. We're just gonna put a little bit of grease on this gear here. And I've also inserted the bearings into the gear. Okay, that's enough. We'll go ahead and slip that into the half here. That little pin. Make sure it's in there all the way. And then we'll put our top shaft on, which I've got a little bit of grease on that as well. Didn't really put any on the actual diff gear because you don't need a whole lot of lube. That's actually probably a little bit too much, but we'll go ahead and get that all spun around there. Okay, that should be just enough. Then we're going to go ahead and put our other side on here. And do not force anything in here, just it should go in fairly easy, just like that. And then the last piece of this is this little ring there. So we've got that put together. Make sure it all is nice and smooth. Now if this, again, were a touring car, I would put a motor on it. I'd actually build it all up, put the motor plate on it, and then I'd go ahead and run it in on the on a charger or what have you with the motor for probably a day or two. I mean, I'm pretty anal about that stuff. It's kind of ridiculous, but I would do that to free up the system, especially in stock. That's what I mostly ran with stock. Now mod off-road, I'm not going to actually do that. Go ahead and at this point we put one screw down here, which again your kits will vary, but the gist of the diff is pretty much the same on all of them. Go ahead and snug that down. Make sure your diff is still spinning freely. And again, I probably got a little bit too much grease on there. So that's it. We'll go to the next page here. Next page, we need to put our motor plate on. This is the stock motor plate. I've actually went ahead and purchased one of the STRCs, which I listed in one of the videos. We're going to go ahead and put this on there. Again, it's got a certain orientation that it needs to go on there. So for now, it actually goes that way. I think so. No, it doesn't. It goes this way. We're going to go ahead and put this on. I'm not going to film that really, and then we'll come back and I'll show you the slipper, so stay tuned. Okay, now we're ready for the slipper. One thing I do want to mention just before we go any further is when you're mounting the motor plate on, especially a metal screw to like a metal object, be sure to put a little bit of Loctite on the ends. And it also outlines that in the book, so go ahead and do that so it doesn't come loose. First thing we're going to do is install one of our slipper discs. These are not the pads, these are actually a metal disc. In this case, they're both identical. Usually they are. There's a little notch. They will only go on one way. There we go. Next thing is we have our spur. Now the spur you can put either way, but it's a good idea to put the tooth number, which in this case 82, facing out. So if you ever need to double check, all you got to do is just pop off the outer disc and you can see. We've got one of our slipper pads in here, or the disc, or whatever you want to call them. Go ahead and slide that on. As you can see, it actually fell off. These can be a little bit of a pain because these particular ones here kind of got a little curve to them, just the way they were packaged. So we'll go ahead and we'll hold it like such, and we'll slip this on this way. There. So we've got the bottom one on. That makes it a little easier. The top one, again, there's little notches. Go ahead and get it as flat as you can. Once you tighten it down, you'll be able to snug it up. Go ahead and put the disc on and find that notch. There we go. And make sure they are seated, the disc, or the pads rather. If they're not, they're going to spin and you're going to burn them up. So, and before we even test this out, we'll tighten it all down, take it off, make sure it's not all boogered up. Now we've got the spring. We want to do this just like we did the other spring. Compress it down a few times with a pair of pliers. Get a little bit broke in. That goes on next. And then last would be our nut here, which this is a little different for me. They use like a flange nut. I'm not used to that. Usually they just use just a regular old nut. Now in the book it says you should have about 18 millimeters from the disc to the inside edge of the bolt. Now that's going to vary. That's a good starting point, but if you're running stock, you're going to run it maybe looser, maybe even tighter, usually looser. If you're running mod, you're more than likely going to run it a little bit tighter than that. So keep that in mind. I mean, that is just a ballpark. Go ahead and tighten it down a little bit. And we could test and see if we've got 18 millimeter. That's where I'll start off at. Even though this is going to be mod, I will start off at that point. This is going to be a little, actually we're going to have to do it this way. And we'll go ahead and measure that. Sorry, it's the outside of the nut. And we've got 17.5, so we'll go ahead and leave it there. I'm measuring just like that. You can see that with the end of the caliper. So we'll go ahead and leave that as is, and we'll have to definitely adjust that when it's on the track. So it may be too tight. And then the last little piece would be this little ring that goes right over this outer diff. And we're done with the diff. So next thing I believe is probably going to be the shock. So I'll have to look at the book. So that'll do it for this this little segment. Sorry, it's a bit boring. I told you it would be, but hopefully maybe you'll learn a little something. Doubtful, but if you do, great. If not, just fast forward it. So get that where it needs to be. It's kind of a little booger. All right. There we go. All right, that does it for now, and thanks for watching. If you have any comments or questions, post those below, and please subscribe. Have a good one.